Join me as we learn together Chitas Chumash for Parshas Yisro. Sunday, the first Torah reading of Parshas Yisro, chapter 18, verse 1. Last week's Torah reading of Parshas Beshalach, we concluded with the war that Moshe waged against Amalek. The Torah now continues to tell us about the Jewish people's travels from Refidim as they journey a short distance to Mount Sinai. Vayishma Yisro, verse 1. Vayishma Yisro chayin Midian chaysen Moshe. And Yisro, Moses' father-in-law, who was a ruler in Midian, he heard He heard everything that God has done to Moshe, Uli Yisrael Amoy, and to the Jewish people, his nation. Ki hoitzi Hashem es Yisrael mimitzrayim, that God has brought the Jewish people out of Egypt. Rashi, verse 18, when the Torah tells us, Vayishma, and he heard, Ma shmua shama uba, what did Yisro hear that caused him to come? So Rashi tells us what did he hear was Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, Umelchamas Amalek, and the war against Amalek. Who is this fellow Yisro? And Rashi tells us that this fellow Yisro had many different names, and in different places we see that he has different names. Yisro, Sheva Shemes Nikrullah, he was called by 7 different names in the Torah, which is Ru'uel, Yisro, Chayvav, Chever, Keni, and Putiel. In this case, Yeser al Shem Sheyiter Parsha Achas B'Torah, he was called Yeser, which because he added another extra Torah reading in the Torah, which is, as we're soon going to learn about, in the second Torah reading of V'at Sechazah. Yisro, and the word that he came Yisro also comes from the word added, L'chishnis Gayer V'kiyim HaMitzvahs, because when he then converted and accepted upon himself the commandments, they added a Vav to his name, Yeser, which then became Yisro. Why was he called Chayvav? Shechibe b'satayra, because he loved the Torah and then converted. V'chayvav hu Yisro. How do I know that Chayvav is Yisro? Because if you look later on in the book of Judges, it says, Mipnei Chayvav chaysa Moshe, from the children of Chayvav, who was the father-in-law of Moshe. As well as Reuel, we find, and one of the reasons why Rashi mentions it here is because when we learned about Moshe's father-in-law before, in chapter 2, when the daughters came back to him and said, this Egyptian man helped us, they went to Reuel, their father. So he tells us Reuel is also Yisro. V'yeshem Reuel, aviv shel Yisro. However, there are those that say that Reuel was the father of Yisro. Umahu eimer v'atavayna al Reuel avien. So then why does it say that they came to Reuel, their father? Shetinoiketz keren lavi avien abba b'sifri. The Sifri says that many times children call their grandfather father, and therefore he calls Reuel, they came to Reuel their father, but in that case, according to that opinion, Reuel was not Yisro himself, but was the father of Yisro, and was the grandfather of Moshe's wife. Chaysen Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, Kana Yisro Mitzchamed Moshe. Over here, Yisro would call himself, would honor himself by the very fact that he is the father-in-law of Moshe. Ani Chaysen HaMelech, that I am the father-in-law of the king. L'sha'avar. However, in the past, when Moshe was living in the place of Midian, over there he would say, Moshe would say, I am Yisro's son-in-law. Shenemar, as we learned in chapter 4 in the book of Exodus, that he returned to Yeser, his father-in-law. So we see as well that at times Yisro would identify himself and pride himself with his son-in-law, and at times Moshe would pride himself with his father-in-law, who was Yisro. L'Moshe Yisrael, to Moshe and the Jewish people. If you notice that over here he puts Moshe individually and the Jewish people individually. Why does he do that? To teach us Shakul Moshe Keneged Kol Yisrael. Moshe was as equal as all the Jewish people, and just like all the Jewish people were worthy to have these miracles happen to them, so to Moshe himself, if he would have been on his own, he also would have been worthy to have these miracles happen to him as well. He's Kol Asheros, everything they did, and the fact that it tells us the exodus of Egypt on its own, as he's going to say later, as he tells us over here, Lohem, this happened to the Jewish people after they already left Egypt, B'yeridas Hamon, with the fact that the manna came to them in the desert, Ube'er, and that they had the well, Ube'al-Molek, and the very fact that they also were able to wage war against the Amalekites. This idea inspired Yisro to come and to convert it with the Jewish people as well. And the main inspiration, even though many things occurred, was the splitting of the sea and the war against Amalek. Ki hoitzi, why does he not include them in the hearing that he heard, that means in the things that are not identified? Why is the exodus of Egypt specifically enumerated? Because out of all the miracles that happened, this was the greatest of all. Verse 2. And Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, took Moshe's wife, Tzipporah, after she had been sent away. What does it mean, been sent away? When God came to Moses in Midian by the burning bush and he told him, go back to Egypt, as it says, then Vayikach Moshe Ishtei Vesbanav. So Moshe went to get his wife and children to bring them down with him to Egypt. But then Vayetzi Aaron L'Krosei, Aaron went out to greet him. Vayifkesheu Bar Elikim, and he met him by the mountain of God. Omar Loi. So Aaron saw Moshe with his family and wife and children. So he said to Moshe, Mihem Alalu, who are all these people? Omar Loi. So Moshe said to Aaron, Zuhi Ishti Shenesasi b'Midian. This is my wife that I married in Midian. Ve'ela Bana, and these are my two sons. Omar Loi. So Aaron says to Moshe, his younger brother, and where are you taking your wife and children? Omar Loi, he told him, L'Mitzrayim, I'm bringing them down to Egypt with me. Omar Loi. So Aaron tells to Moshe, why are you bringing them to Egypt? We are already worried and we see the pain and suffering that the Jewish people that are already in Egypt are going through. And so you're bringing more Jews to Egypt. Omar La. So therefore he turned to his wife Tzipporah and said, Lechi, go, leveis avich, and return back home. Not l'shnei baneh, she took the two sons, v'holchala, and returned home. Therefore the Torah says, after he sent her away that she shouldn't be part of the slavery of Egypt, now she came back to rejoin her husband and the Jewish people. Who were the sons? Verse 3, Vashnei baneh, and her two sons, Asher Shem Echad Gershom, one of them, his name was Gershom. Why was he called Gershom? Ki Omar Gera Yitzi Beretz Zechriya, because Moshe said, I have been a stranger in an alien land. Verse 4, Vashem Echad Eliezer, and her second son, whose name was Eliezer. Ki Elikei Avi Be'ezri, because God of my father was at my aid. Vayatzileini Mecherev Parei, and he rescued me from the sword of Pharaoh. What was this that Moshe was in danger, that the sword of Pharaoh was upon him, that God had to save him? When Dust and Aviram told Pharaoh and slandered Moshe about the fact that he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, and at that time Pharaoh wanted to kill Moshe. His neck became like a pillar of marble, and at that time he was not able to be killed, and therefore he was saved from the sword of Pharaoh and he was able to escape. Verse 5. Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, and his sons and his wife came, El Moshe, to Moshe, El Amidbar, to the desert, Asher hu chaynasham haralikim, that he was resting there, that he was encamped there in the mountain of God, by the mount, which was Mount Sinai. El Hamidbar. Why does he have to tell us that he was by the desert? Don't we know the Jewish people were in the desert? We know that they were in the desert. The Torah is telling us about the greatness and the praise of Yisro. Dibra Akos of the verse wants to extol. Yisro was sitting and he was a chief in the city of Midian. He was at the height of his people, that he was the ruler of the people of Midian. And still in all, he decided to leave his place, which was very comfortable, and come to the desert, Mokim Tayu, a place of emptiness, L'shmaya divrei Torah, to come hear the words of Torah from Moshe. Verse 6. Vayomer el Moshe, and was told to Moshe, Ani chaysencha Yisro, your father-in-law Yisro Boilecha came to you, V'ishtecha, and your wife, V'shnei v'na'ima, and her two sons with him. Vayomer el Moshe, what does it mean it was told to Moshe? Alidei shliach, through a messenger came to tell him, Ani chaysencha Yisro, v'imen ata yetzu b'nigini, now, why did he have to say, your father-in-law is here, and your wife and your two sons? That if you're not going to come out in my honor, come out in the honor of your wife. If you're not going to come out in the honor of your wife, at least come out in the honor of your children. Verse 7. Moshe went out to greet his father-in-law, and he bowed to him, and he kissed him. They inquired about each other's welfare, about how they're doing, and they entered into the tent. Rashi, Vayetze Moshe, Kavod Gadol Niskabed Yisro Beis Hashem. Great honor and respect was given to Yisro at that time. Kivan Sheyatza Moshe, because once Moshe was left to greet him and to bring him in, Yatza Aaron. Aaron then followed him. Then followed Nadav Avihu, the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. Who would ever see these people leave the clouds of glory and go out to welcome this guest that would not follow them and go greet them as well? From this language, I don't know who bowed to. Was it Moshe that bowed to Yisro? Was it Yisro that bowed to Moshe? However, when the Torah uses the terminology that they bow, the man to his fellow, who is the man, tells us, Ish, who is called the man, Ish, Moshe, this must be referring to Moshe, as we know that in the book of Numbers it says, Ish Moshe, the man Moshe. So when the Torah tells us the words, and they bowed one to each other, I don't know necessarily it's referring to, but by the very fact that the Torah says, man to his fellow, man is referring to Moshe. Verse 8. Moshe told his father-in-law, everything that God has done to Pharaoh, and to the Egyptians, Yisrael, all for the sake of the Jewish people, and as well as all the travails that have befallen them, that have befallen them along the way, and how God has saved them. Verse 8. Why did Moshe tell all the stories about what happened to the Jewish people? To bring him and to extend him the idea and teach him about the greatness of God, that he should be impressed and he should be able to enjoy and become close to Torah. What was all the travails that happened to the Jewish people? The very fact that the Egyptians were pursuing them, Shalamolik, the fact that Egyptians pursued them by the sea, and the sea had to split for them, and as well as the war of Amalek. The word Hatla'ah, Lamed Aleph Mina Yisay Chalteva. The word La'ah is the actual root word of the word. T, the tough beforehand, is not from the root word. It is only giving to tell me to make it sound well. Lutikun v'yisayid hanefel mimenu leprakim. This is something we have a lot of times, and over here Rashi gives us examples. For example, truma, which the word is rum, and you put a tuf beforehand. Lo taram. Tenufa, the word is nof, and you put a tuf beforehand. Tekuma means come, which is stand up, and there's a tuf beforehand as well. Tenu'o, where the word is na, and there's a tuf beforehand as well. So over here Rashi is telling us that the word as well is la'ah, and the tuf beforehand is just there to make it sound proper. Verse 9. Vayichad Yisro al kol ha'tova asher osa Hashem liYisrael. And Yisro rejoiced about all the good that God has done for the Jewish people, asher yitziloi mi'ad Mitzrayim, that he saved them from the hands of Egypt, from the authority of the Egyptians. Rashi, Vayichad Yisro, with the word Vayichad means Vayisramach, and he rejoiced. Zeu pshutei, this is the simple interpretation. Medrash Agada, the Medrash says, why does the Torah use a special terminology of Vayichad, not Vayismach, which would be regular to mean to rejoice? Because Nasa Psari Chedudin Chedudin, his skin became like he had goosebumps from the very fact that he heard Meitzar Libu Mitzrayim. He was distressed about the fact that Egypt was destroyed, because as we know, Jethro, Yisro, was from the ministers in Egypt. And therefore, when he hears about his own country being destroyed, it gave him a little bit of a goosebumps there. That's why we know, Hainu Damri Inchi, that's what people say. A convert, even after 10 generations that he's converted, do not embarrass his nation before him, because since he still has some feeling for the people that he came from, even though he converted, so too just by Yisro, even though he converted to the Jewish people, but because he originated from Egypt, he still felt some closeness or some feeling for what happened in the people of Egypt. Al kol ha'tova, for all the good. What's the good beyond everything we've mentioned, the exodus of Egypt, which is Utevas Haman. This is the fact that God gave them the manna, V'be'er, and the well, and the Torah that he's giving them. Al kulam, but on all of them, what was the greatest of all achievements? Asher yitzilo miyad Mitzrayim, that he saved them from the hands of Egypt, because Yisro knew better than anybody else. Ad achshav lo haya eved yochel ivreich miMitzrayim. Until this point in time, no slave was ever able to escape from Egypt. It was a place that was really closed off well. And over here in the middle of broad daylight, 600,000 men, plus women and children, all walked out of Egypt. This was the greatest event and miraculous event that happened at the time. Verse 10. Vayomer Yisro, and Yisro said, Baruch Hashem, blessed is God, Asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim, that He saved you, He rescued you from the hands of the Egyptians. Umiyad Parim, from Pharaoh. Asher hitzil esa'am, that He liberated the people. Mitachas yad Mitzrayim, from the authority and the slavery of the Egyptians. Verse 10, Asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim. And over here, Yisro enumerates, number 1, Umba Kasha. It was a difficult nation, a nation who made strenuous and harsh decrees. Miyad Pare, from Pharaoh, who was a Melech Kasha, a difficult king with harsh decrees. Mitachas Yad Mitzrayim, from under the hands of Egypt, meaning Loshen Ridu Yomorus, like the Targum explains, from the back-breaking authoritarian labor that they did to them. Yad, from the hand which presses down, which would press down upon them and make things difficult. Vihi Avoda, this was the work that was forced upon the Jewish people. Verse 11. Ato Yadaiti. Yisro continues to say, now I know that God is greater than all deities. Because with the very scheme that they plotted against the Jewish people happened to them. Ato Yadaiti, what does it mean, now I know? I knew about God, I heard about God previously. But now that I have come to identify and I see it from up close, I am now more verified and understand and appreciate the greatness that God has done for the Jewish people. Mikol Alikim, what does it mean from all deities? It comes to teach us, Yisro was somebody who was thorough and knowledgeable with all the different types of idolatries in the world. There was not an idolatry that Yisro did not serve. That's why, if you recall, in the beginning of book of Exodus, why they didn't like Yisro's daughters was because Yisro tried out every single one of these idol-worshipping methods, and he became a minister of them and then left them. So all of them hated him. Now he says, I come to appreciate what God is because I've experienced and I've tried them all out, and I know that God is greater than all of them. Like the Targum says, they tried to annihilate the water with water, and they themselves were killed with water as they drowned in the sea. Asher Zadu. What does the word Asher Zadu mean? Asher Yirshiu. They planned. They were wicked that they wanted to devise plans against them. The same way we have with Yaakov cooked up a stew, again, for his father. It also uses the terminology vayazed, meaning that God does measure for measure. Bigdata sharbishlu, with the same dish that they were ready to cook the Jewish people, so to speak, ban ispashlu, they were cooked in, meaning that the very same plan that they planned against the Jews happened to them. Verse 12. Vayikach Yisro chesed Moshe, and Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, took oilo zvachim. He offered ascent offerings and peace offerings, lalikim, to God. Vayavei Aaron v'chol ziknei Yisrael, and Aaron and all the elders of the Jewish people came. Lecha lechem, to break bread, to eat bread. And chesed Moshe, with the father-in-law of Moshe, lifnei Elokim, in the presence of God. Rashi, what does it mean? Oila kimashma. A offering shikula kolil, an offering which will be completely consumed on the altar. Uzvachim, this is a peace offering that also part of it was eaten by the owners who brought the sacrifice. Vayave Aaron, and Aaron came to eat with Moshe. Moshe hechanolach, where did Moshe go? Didn't Moshe go out and greet him, and he's the one that caused this whole honor? Ella. This comes to teach us that Moshe was doing something at the time, that Moshe was there serving them, and he himself went to welcome his guests, as it was there in the presence of God. Why does it tell us in the presence of God? If Moshe was the one that was eating it there, it tells us, and from here the sages have learned, that one who enjoys from the meal that sages and scholars are eating at, it's as if he's enjoying from God's greatness and God's presence. This concludes the first Torah reading of Parshas Yisro.